You're listening to Pushing the Envelope, Life at the Cutting Edge of Customs Innovation. I'm Tom Muller with the Cross-Border Research Association. On this show, we explore the frontiers of customs creativity in conversations with customs and logistics experts, technology innovators, research scientists, and other leaders in the field. Industry insiders call this show the Pencast because it's part of PenCP, a network for boosting customs innovation funded by the European Union under the Horizon 2020 program. Today I'm speaking with senior members of Hurricane Commerce, a dynamic new firm whose artificial intelligence-driven platform provides data enhancement, duty and tax calculations, and screening for prohibited and restricted goods and denied parties at speed. Hurricane's database covers 150 countries and currencies worldwide, and their clients include national postal authorities, postal operators, online retailers, marketplaces, and technology platforms. Hurricane is a new company, but its leaders are veterans with many decades of experience in tech, logistics, and compliance. With me today are two of Hurricane's leaders, the firm's co-founder, David Spottiswood, and senior advisor, Martin Palmer, who have a combined experience of many decades in customs-related fields. So, gentlemen, I'll start with you, David. Could you explain a bit about your background and how you got involved in the customs arena?
Thanks for inviting us onto this. I think, number one, the statement is this space is probably becoming, and Martin, you'll corroborate that later on, but this space is becoming more and more important for global trade. So my background, essentially, I'm a long in the tooth logistics guy. When Martin and I were at TNT IPEC, that was back in the 80s, they kind of revolutionized, or we revolutionized the way transportation was done. Right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people thought it was all about, our trucks and all the rest of it. And reality is it was probably more about the way we managed the data and customs, even back then. So anyway, long story short, I moved on to DHL, and the integrators have always been good at data. They understood the importance of, as much information up front as you can get. Is a really good operating model. So I moved across to DHL, moved around Europe, etc., and then ended up running the global operation for DHL. And that was all about, that sort of seamless provision of data to customs to keep things moving. And, back in the day it was how do you start, providing customs and the import country with data even before the shipments had even left the origin. So it was always something that was on my radar. And, when I left DHL back in 2005-ish, I was looking at global e-commerce exploding. Now, back in those days, people thought I was nuts that cross-border e-commerce was going to be big. So I do kind of laugh a little bit on that now. But and I started a number of different companies that were all about cross-border e-commerce, et cetera, et cetera. And if I fast forward, Martin and I hadn't seen each other for, 25 years, Mark, something like that. Yeah, and I thought this would be a really good idea to get into more detail around the whole customs arena, the whole data piece, the legislation, compliance, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at it and thought, it's something that we need to do that's really easy for consumers and for operators to access. And hence the reason that, as we always say, we put the band back on the road again, which is, Mark, a number of the founders of the company. And it was all about, how do you simplify and make transparent the entry points into countries from a customs point of view.
Martin Palmer is within Hurricane one of the true experts in the customs arena.
Yeah.
Martin, how did you get involved in Hurricane? But what is your background and what do you bring? What experience do you bring to Hurricane?
I started in imports many years ago, before even the European Union. So when Brexit happened, leaving the European Union brought back old memories for me. But I ended up being the global customs director for TNT, looking after all their customs import-export operations around the world. Mm-hmm. As David alluded to, it's not about trucks and planes, it's about what you actually do on the ground. So in the integrator sector or industry, we were always very focused upon the importance of accurate, complete and timely data for many years. And it sounds as if the act was completely together for the integrators, but that's not true, because it's been a very long, hard battle to get companies up to speed with the requirements that they actually need to fulfill. Mm-hmm. With Hurricane, we've taken that even further, and not only is it about the complete, timely and accurate data, but it's the speed and volumes. The whole dynamics have changed over the years from, talking about hundreds or thousands of transactions a day to nowadays talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of transactions on most days.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I laughed when, David, you said that people poo-pooed your notion of e-commerce taking off. I mean, this Amazon thing will never run, will it? Yeah.
Well, it was funny because, I was a board member of DHL Deutsche Post, and DHL was only a B2B company, right? And probably one of the best in the world. And this whole notion of shipping B2C was kind of, are people really going to buy cross-border, a case for an iPhone, or not even then, but a case for a phone? And I was kind of, they will. And it was funny, actually. Just anecdotally, I was talking to my wife the other day, and back in those days, I always thought m-commerce would be really big as well, right? Mobile phone, people buying stuff online with a mobile phone. Mm-hmm. And again, people laughed at me and said, well, that'll never happen because you need to be behind a computer. Now, I think something like 60% of all global e-commerce transactions are now conducted by the mobile phone.
Wow, 60%. That's incredible.
Yeah, something like that. It's a big number now. And but it just goes to show that, as Martin said, it's kind of this convergence, right? So there was me sitting there saying, I think people will buy cross-border because borders are irrelevant for people making a purchase, right? If the price point's right and the transportation's right and the delivery's right, then whether they're getting it from Canada, China, Holland, the UK, doesn't matter. Right. And that's proved to be true. When Martin and I were at TNT, the old TNT, we had record days where we'd move 15 shipments a day, right, in 24 hours. Now, most of the posts are moving millions a day, right? You cannot do that manually. It's just impossible. And as following the meeting we had in Belgium the end of last year, the transactional volume you have to automate because you can't do it any other way. But if you're going to automate it, you've got to get it right.
How do you characterize the importance of customs in the current world of commerce / e-commerce? I mean, how do you obviously, there's a balance between facilitating trade, protecting society, and collecting duties and taxes.
I'll have a crack at that first. For me, and you don't hear this very often from the private sector, but I have huge sympathy for customs and what they have to do. Mm-hmm. And year after year, they've been piled on with additional requirements, security requirements, CITES requirements, health and safety requirements, all in addition to the fundamental elements of where they first started out, which was really about revenue collection.
Right.
So they have many things to do. And I quite often hear that things are delayed in customs. Most customs around the world nowadays use pretty sophisticated electronic clearance systems. And the goods are not really sort of delayed in customs. The data associated with the goods are delayed in customs.
Understood.
And I think that's, hopefully customs won't stop me as I go through Heathrow on the way home. But it for me, I really do feel some elements of sympathy to their workload, and the fact that if greater focus had been put upon the data information associated with those shipments, I think customs lives would be a lot simpler than they are today, resulting in a better customer experience, happier importer and exporters, and more revenue being collected.
Customs actually play a really critical role because, if you think about it, going back, pre the B2C boom, right? Customs were dealing with B2B businesses that, you could vet, you could check, standard data, standard products, et cetera, et cetera. In B2C, you can have anything coming in the country. And I think customs play a absolutely valuable job in not only making sure that governments do collect the taxes that are associated with product, but also they play a huge and important part in, making sure that the, goods coming into a country are allowed. And as Martin says, are not on, CITES lists or, anything that endangers, species, etc. So I think they play a much, much more important role that most people give them credit for. They're not just the policeman to make sure that the right, rules are being followed, but they're also, if you look at, and I won't go into too much detail, but if you look at the Stop Act, in the US, that's all about making sure that, drugs and nasty stuff don't get into the country. And I get that. Somebody needs to do that. And I think, that whole piece from customs is maybe misunderstood, undervalued, but they play a critical role in global trade, and not negatively. It's positive if people provide them with the right information in the first place.
That's very well put, and I think that's a natural lead-in to your saying a few words about the genesis and evolution of Hurricane, because, as you say, getting the right data to start with is more than half the battle. Am I right?
No, I mean, for me, it was always about adding value for our customers, and really that value for our customers was processing goods at speed through customs, and there are. I've been fighting with our customers at various stages of my career for many, many years, trying to explain why certain data elements are required for customs and when they're actually required for customs. And it's been a rather long, hard battle. But what we tried to do in Hurricane is identify the things that would add the greatest value for our customers and indirectly for the customs authorities around the world. So we concentrated on things such as goods classification, looking for goods which are controlled or may require certain special permits or documentation, looking at elements such as duty and tax calculation, and also looking at entities, sanctioned individuals and entities that you shouldn't actually be carrying out business with. And these are the things that we focused on. And doing these one by one is arguably rather simple. But when you've got 100,000 transactions to process in a 2-hour time period for those goods to connect with an international line haul, then it becomes rather challenging. And that's what Hurricane does. We do it in volume, and we do it at speed, and we do it well.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, how do you balance speed and accuracy? I mean, in a nutshell, how does Hurricane balance speed and accuracy?
Well, without giving away all our trade secrets,
oh darn,
which are a lot of greatly sort of linked into this area, it really is the way that we've built our database. And we've used some very smart magic and an awful lot of common sense, and we've tried to simplify, the complex in all of that process. And that's a pretty lame answer, but there's a lot of technology behind that, Tom.
No, I can imagine a lot of experience, 30 years, 40 years of experience per person. Your team adds quite a bit of field experience.
When we put Hurricane together, right, is some of us, and three of us actually all worked together 30 plus years ago, right? So we all know each other. And we knew each other's expertise. We also didn't just look at this from a logistics viewpoint, right? Because traditionally that's how we would look at it, right? Because we're all from logistics. And we actually brought in a CTO who has nothing to do with logistics. I think Mark, he used to put satellites in space or something. And so that was quite an interesting 7 years ago, first meeting of the minds. And I think what was really interesting was Ian, our CTO, was looking at this from a algorithm point of view, right, and a logic point of view. So that was good. So that kind of takes care of how you look at the world. And then Martin was looking at it very much from a expertise point of view. What's going to be required, and then you merge the two things together, and what we've ended up with. And again, as Martin says, without giving out the trade secret, but what you've ended up with is a platform that processes data in a blink of an eye. With a level of accuracy that is unseen in the logistics world, right? And it's because we approach it in that way that we've managed to balance the speed and the accuracy. When we started Hurricane, we brought the sort of team, Martin in. We brought the Martin Noble, who's our CEO and great friend, and a number of other people, and we sat in this little room in the top of a pub in Market Harborough, right? And we all sat there and said, well, this sounds like a good idea, but there was no meat on the bones. There was nothing more than I had rung Martin Noble and said, what do you think? And he went, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So we sat at the top of this pub. Do you remember that, Mark? And we said, yeah, what we need to do is simplify duties and taxes, right? And that was the first conversation, and we all got very excited. And then I think Martin Palmer then goes, yeah, but you can't just do duties and taxes. We need to peel the onion. And that's when we really started to get into, okay, what else do you need from a data point of view for a cross-border movement? And that's why, we've ended up with a data processing platform that covers pretty much every element that customs need. Do you remember that, Mark? You just said...
I remember it well.
We need to peel the onion. And we had all been battling down the duties and tax route, and he came up with things that we didn't even know about. And then it was up to Ian to say, okay, so how do I take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of lines of data and package it into a API? And that was the foundation. And every day, because of the way the system's built, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better and better. And happy days in that sense. And also, by the way, recognised by customs. Some of the customs authorities have absolutely given us the thumbs up on how fast and accurate the system is.
Which makes their life and the lives of their customers in turn much, much easier, right? I mean, it makes it better for everyone if the data is clean and rapidly processed.
Yeah.
A lot of this has got to be trial and error, however, right? I mean, it sounds good to write a huge API and so on, but I know enough about computer coding to know about debugging. Share with us, if you can, one of your most memorable successes in this hurricane journey, and one of your most memorable failures. Feel free to brag and blush as you wish.
We are very mature, the management team of Hurricane, and we fortunately won and lost a number of battles throughout our careers. And I think we go into our development within Hurricane eyes wide open. So we've never gone into a customer and said, we will fix all your problems tomorrow. But what we'll do, we'll work with you tomorrow and we'll give you an immediate improvement of X, and then working together, we can get that point after X nearer to 100% over a period of time. And we've seen this with some of our customers. Initially when we've gone into them, we've taken their data from sort of 20, 28%, 30% accuracy, overnight up to levels of 60, 65%. And then working together over the coming weeks and months, we take their data accuracy up into the early 90s. Perfection is never going to happen. And obviously, this is all dependent on the initial quality of the data put in by the customers. So that is what I would call our success. But that's our standard business model. Now, as I can't think of a failure, I'll give that to David.
I don't think it's failure. I think it's, more assuming that, people had a base of data that was good, right? Yeah. Because we came from the integrator business and our data wasn't bad. So I think our maybe a little bit of naivety, right, is we assumed that the base data would be good. Now, I know, and Martin knows, we've worked with customers where they say, no, we've got HS codes. And you say, okay, what have you got? And they go, HS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's like, right, well, that means nothing. Yeah, but we filled the box. And that'll be good enough for customs. And it's like
garbage in, garbage out, right?
There you go. So I think, that's been one of the, I think, again, not failure, but naivety, I think, in the beginning. And as Martin says, what I find personally, very satisfying is, we lost a tender with a company a year ago, not because of us necessarily. It was based on somebody coming in really low on price. And that's something we will not do. I mean, it's an important role we play. And you don't buy a Rolls Royce for tuppence, right? And we lost the tender. And I was a bit disappointed because it's a big brand name, which he'll hear more about in the coming months. But anyway, 6 months in, this customer came back to us and said, look, what we bought is actually doesn't really do what it says it does. Yeah. And they asked us to come back into the party. And 6 months on, they have stated just before Christmas, they said Hurricane is not only the best in class, but Hurricane will be fundamentally front and center of everything they do going forward for their business. And they're a big, big, big operator. And you know what? That's kind of, again, naive that we think we can win everything, out the box, but very, very, satisfying that actually we are seen as the go-to brand now. As Martin said, it's been a journey. But when customers are saying, you've improved our data from origin of 30% up to 96, 97, and therefore we've, managed to process shipments better. We've got better customer service. We got less returns. We've got less costs of warehousing. Customs are happy with us. That's a that's a good result. That's a good result.
And it sounds to me that not only is it good for your direct customer, but again, it creates an improved data landscape that's good for everybody. It's good for customs and postal authorities, and it's good for law enforcers and everybody, right?
We very much concentrated on the logistics industry, but we're now involved with the payment industry. We're now involved with banking industry. As you know, Tom, we're now involved with customs. Our sort of playing field has shifted. With one of the posts who have a banking arm, we do all the customer vetting on the banking. With one of the major credit card companies, we're about to do all the vetting on denied parties and prohibited and restricted for them.
And are these services that were requested of you from an existing customer, or ideas you had that are coming out of the data that made you think, hey, we could do that business?
Yeah, a bit of both, actually.
Okay.
One of the big card companies I was talking to, and I said, so how, so you process on behalf of a retailer sells their product. And do you know that you're liable if you're selling to a denied party? Mm-hmm. And they were kind of, why would we be liable? And I said, well, because everybody in the supply chain, anybody who touches that has a liability. Uh-huh. And they didn't realize it. And then they said, well, can you help us with that? And we said, yeah, of course we can, because our API, whether it's a bank, a card company, a postal company, it doesn't matter. Is data. Right. Yeah. That's a successful directional change for us. But on the back of that, some of the big payment houses are now requesting the same sort of approach from us. So we're very much, as we describe ourselves, we're very, cross-border data, and whether you're moving parcels, money laundering, as an example, with one of the authorities involved in cross-border money laundering, we're in conversation with them at the moment. So it's a big playing field, and the problem for a bank is the same as the problem for a postal company, is the same for the customs authority. It's all about the data.
Uh-huh. And it sounds an exciting time when you are morphing as an organization to meet the requirements of a rapidly morphing landscape, right? I mean, demands are going up. The three of us met at Bruges at the end of last year at the kickoff meeting of Parsec, which is an EU Horizon project designed to unite industry and customs, postal authorities, and other organizations to increase parcel and letter security through tech and data innovation. Again, that brought into the room a number of different players whose backgrounds, whose ultimate aims can be quite different, and sometimes almost at odds, at least in terms of data can be shared, right? And first question about that: what do you have customers who are hesitant or even unable to share certain data with you, and how do you get around that?
Yeah, not really. A lot of the data that we use is outside of any privacy, GDPR or any of the major privacy programs, because when we're looking at classification and landed cost calculation and prohibitions, for example, we're only really interested in descriptions of goods, values, currencies, that type of stuff, which is not really sensitive information. With our denied party screening, obviously we need names and addresses in the first place to carry out that screening. But once we deliver back the information to our customers as to how the information is fared against the sanctions and embargoes lists, we no longer have a need for the name and address data. So to date, we've not come across that issue. We do get questions about the servers, where our servers or the data areas around the world where the information is processed, they're not servers, occasionally. And we process data, and we can process data to relate to our customers' requirements if they want to avoid a particular region of the world, for example. All above board and sort of transparent. But GDPR and shared data to date has not been an issue at all for us.
When I was sitting in the room with customs, postal, law enforcement on the one side, technological researchers, cutting edge data scientists on the other, and industry, representative industry, I kept thinking, boy, this is a serious challenge to build communication and build trust between private industry on the one hand and the customs community on the other. What do you think are the biggest challenges to building that kind of communication, fruitful communication for all?
Yeah, there are a lot of projects out there at this moment in time, but particularly the global single window project that many countries and different organizations are adapting at this and adopting at this moment in time. But there are more questions, I think, from the regulatory authorities still to be answered than there are from the private sector. The private sector, or large parts of the private sector, the integrators, the more sophisticated freight forwarders out there, they've been sending this data around the world for many, many years. And they've had their own infrastructure to transfer, complete data. We were doing this in TNT 20, 30, 35 years ago. Now, where you have challenges are the authorities that add bits of information at different stages, at export, at transit, and transit can be multiple transit locations, and at import. And there does appear to be a little bit of regulatory challenges to be addressed there. But I think from the private sector, as long as we're not talking about sensitive company-related information, we've been doing it forever.
Now, you say trust is always a problem. David, do you think that there are, what are the kinds of barriers that divide private industry and the public and public servants? Is there a different kind of person that goes into one or the other? How do you build trust across that divide?
Traditionally, it's been combative, right? So they've been at odds with each other, right? And it's been seen as, the private industry trying to get things through that they shouldn't, and the government trying to, stop that. And I actually think that where you see the relationships working very well is where people have moved on from that sort of viewpoint and moved on to, look, we're all in this to try and improve the global trade. And I think there's a willingness there on both sides. And where you see that it's moved away from the sort of us and them type approach, you get very, very good, healthy relationship. Back in the day when because remember, we come from as I said earlier, we come from the integrator industry, and we always felt it was an unfair playing field with us as a private industry compared to the post, because the post you could send anything through, right? You never checked. Call anything a gift and it got through. And we used to get pretty annoyed at it as an integrator because we used to have to declare everything. However, what that did mean is we used to use the word trusted entity, right? Because we would provide what customs wanted. We were in a lot of geographies seen as a trusted entity. So by the customs authorities. So therefore, shipments could move very quickly. We developed something called CIA, which was clearance in air, which is where we would actually do the customs clearance as the parcels were traveling, right? And we could only do that because customs trusted us to do it right. So I think where you're seeing the change now is of course that's changed for all entities now, including Post.
Right. Yeah. This war, we're all in this to provide global trade, is a very, very good sort of theme song for the kind of meeting that took place in Bruges. And again, as observing all different parties from the outside, I could see on the one hand a very clear, enormous benefit to fruitful and open cooperation, and on the other hand, very different types of people, very different landscapes in which they work, very different constraints on their work. And not just public and private, but between, say, a university research facility and a scientist working in customs. Very, very different backgrounds and a lot of scope for mistrust, a lot of scope for competitive rather than complementary cooperation. So fascinating challenge. Yeah. And Hurricane does, forwards that, pushes that challenge forward by trying to provide quality data for all, right? Is that a fair statement?
When we first started with Hurricane, and the vision was, Pete, to try and become the data highway, the logistics industry, right? And what's really interesting now is, if I look at, the major postal authorities around the world are all on the Hurricane platform, right? Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting is now that they want to work together. Mm-hmm. So the attitude is, well, if you're exporting through with the Hurricane data and we're importing on the Hurricane platform for the data, then wouldn't it make sense for the customs to access that platform so that, 1 and 1 and 1 is 3? Right. Whereas data sources at the moment can come from all sorts of places, and that's where you get the disparity. So I think the way we see things moving forward is, and I'll probably involve you guys in this to a certain degree, is we're gonna launch a sort of forum every quarter for our customers and also customs to say, even for half a day, let's get together. What are the things that you need to the platform to do for you collectively, not just from an exporter or an importer, but for the customs as well? But, it's like with ANPost, Irish Post, one of our big, customers, they had a requirement to provide Y and C codes last year, or was it last year? Beginning of last year. And it was a requirement from customs to ANPost that they needed to do this. So we worked with ANPost to actually make sure that was provided within the system. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden you're satisfying all parties in the chain because, ANPost need to provide it. They didn't have it. Customs wanted it. So I think, within hours, I think we had it embedded into the system. So, so there's the good collaboration model is where we see Hurricane being in the sort of the middle of it to pull parties together to get that harmony.
A lot of these requirements are not new requirements as such. They're just being enforced with certain parties for perhaps the first time. And there are so many things happening around the world. And we've made reference to ICS 2. ICS 1 happened, I think, in 2007, if I remember correctly. And, the integrators have been working under a very, very similar regime for many years. And now we've got ICS 2 coming this March, and we've got ICS 3 coming in 2024. So, again, it's another example of data that's been required in certain sectors for many years, just coming out to a wider marketplace. The STOP Act in the USA, another great example. This is particularly focused on the postal data elements, but they're the same data elements that freight forwarders and integrators have been working with for tens of years. So a lot of this, as I said, it's not new requirements. It's stronger enforcement for wider audiences.
Your idea of the forum, quarterly forum, it connects with my next question. I mean, I'm looking at projects, EU projects, Horizon projects and others. I'm thinking of Parsec, PenCP, and various others. How important are projects like that in the development of cutting-edge customs practices, both in the development of practices, but also in the development of, as you say, trust between the different parties?
Well, in the last 12 months, Tom, I mean, we've become very active in this particular area, and we have involvements with a number of countries now with their single window projects. We're involved with the likes of the Parsec Group and the International Chamber of Commerce, and there's two elements, I guess, for us. One is if we can influence is one obviously key factor. The direction that we believe that the data processing elements that we're involved in develop, that's key. And also information. Being part of these groups is fantastic networking opportunities, and we all learn from each other.
And what is it like to talk? I mean, as Hurricane, I would imagine you reach out on a regular basis to different areas where in search of new data tools, new technologies. I mean, what is it like to engage with university or individual research startups? What is that something that you do in the normal course of work, or is that something special that a meeting of Parsec or PenCP is brings to your work experience?
The thing that I'm finding particularly interesting is that there's parts of the world that we would normally consider to be less developed when it comes to customs systems and data processing systems, that are seeing certain opportunities now they know they have to do something. Their computer systems, their customs processes are greatly out of date. And all of a sudden I'm seeing countries go from 10 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour almost overnight, because they've got no grandfather right systems there that they have to worry about. They've decided that they're going to completely develop new systems, and they're talking about the latest technology. So I think there's a real opportunity for some of the less developed customs regimes around the world all of a sudden to take a jump ahead of some of the slower developed countries, if that makes sense. And being part, we're finding that some of those countries, because they are looking for the latest, the biggest, the brightest technology, are very interested in talking to Hurricane to see how we can help them on that journey.
Fascinating. And again, it's interdisciplinary, cross-border questioning, right? Coming from a bunch of different areas along the universe of customs innovation. That's encouraging and exciting. I mean, the part of the PenCP mission statement, I'll read it, is we aim to connect innovative, spirited customs officers and to become a robust and permanent customs innovation boosting network, helping to accelerate both incremental and radical innovations for the direct benefit of customs administrations in Europe and even beyond. How does Hurricane fit into that picture of creating an innovation spirited, environment in which technologies and new approaches can flourish?
I think we're there already. For us, the challenge is really from a regulatory viewpoint. There was the World Customs Organization Technology Conference in October in Maastricht.
Right.
And we got involved in that. And next year we'll actually be participating in the conference from an exhibition viewpoint. But it's environments like that which enable casual passers-by to have the opportunity to understand some of the technology that's available to them. Traditionally, a lot of customs authorities, they have really circulated within the same old groups.
Right.
And the same old vendors. You go into the UK and you look at who's quoting for the next development of customs systems, and it's the same old names that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years as such. And I think the authorities need to take the opportunity to go out there and really see what's on the marketplace today, because the whole world has taken a quantum leap forward in the ability to develop technology. And when I talk to some customs authorities, their volumes are minute compared with the volumes that are going through a post office or the likes of one of the major integrators on a nightly basis. So I think there's an awful lot of knowledge, and bringing groups of private sector and government authorities together is a great way of sharing that knowledge.
I was sitting listening to the conversations, the multidisciplinary conversations, and fascinating leads of how to cooperate in an interdisciplinary manner. As managers, what are the challenges of following through and taking these wonderful ideas that are launched in a 3-day meeting like Parsec in Bruges and bringing them to fruition? I mean, that's got to be a huge organizational challenge. David, let's follow up on that and say, what did you hear at Bruges during the Parsec meeting? What did you hear at Maastricht that struck you as the handful of really important ideas that are going to make a difference now?
I can work very close, or we can work very closely with customs to actually look at how do we align the way they look at data and the world and the way we look at data and the world on behalf of our customers. For me, they were the two things that came out. How can you align the customs view on data to the private or the operator's view on data, right? Because that's something you can align really, really quickly, right? So for me, that was key. Mark, what about you from Maastricht?
The opening words from the Secretary General really were about data. Just the importance of data and the availability of data and the ability to share data, both on revenue, security, safety aspects, and a lot more. And I think for me, the message is common. Everything that I've attended, I was in Los Angeles in July at the Customs and Border Protection annual event, and everything that I go to is echoing the same message. The future, the past was about data. The future is even more so about data. And I think the challenges for industry and the regulatory authorities is to bring those different layers in harmony with each other. The private sector, and I've had many customs officials have this conversation with me. They say, you're lucky you're in the private sector. You can make your own decisions about things, which is very, very true. And we need to just weigh it up from a commercial viability viewpoint and practicality viewpoint, and we can go ahead. And even within customs regimes, we have some authorities that will go in 6 months' time, and we will have some that go in 6 years' time. And I think that's the greatest challenge that we face, that regulatory authorities mature at different rates.
That's a fascinating observation. I'm going to conclude our conversation with two very general, big sky, open questions that don't have a specific answer, but I'd love the benefit of your experience to shed some light on these. In general, what do you perceive to be the key challenges for the next generation of customs workers? And I'm talking both public and private sector. What are the key challenges that need to be fixed for customs to work faster and more accurately at the same time?
I think it's accessibility to the right sort of technology. David mentioned DHL, CIA clear it in the air clearance service. We were all doing similar types of things 15, 20 years ago from an integrated viewpoint. So we know it's all possible. Mm-hmm. I think the challenges are the sign-off and acceptance that projects such as the single window project, which only got signed off in the European Union a couple of months ago, and I think in the UK about 10 months ago. And these are things that we've been talking about from WTO and WCO guises for many, many years. I think it's accessibility to those systems to start the implementation process in those, because in many ways they will become the backbone for the data processing at country level, and will create the, if you like, the railway stations between which we need to lay the technical lines between the countries. Private sector, it's there's always this, we've heard this before, that this is going to happen or this is going to be enforced then. I think the certain elements of world trade always challenge whether enforcement is going to come with regulation. So I think, if you issue a regulation or you create a regulation, you need to make sure it's enforced. And I think from a government viewpoint, the STOP Act is a great example of this in the USA. It's been around for a couple of years now. And one of the biggest challenges that CBP in the US are facing is the enforcement of it. Mm-hmm. So, they would be my sort of general observations there, Tom.
Yeah. David, do you have any thoughts on the key challenges that you see coming in the next decade?
One of our customers, I was talking to him about ICS2 and preparation and blah, blah, blah. And he said, it's not about dates and events. He said, it's about the growing demand for data. And he said, STOP Act, ICS2, IOSS, all of these things are important events. But as Martin alludes to, the challenge is how do you keep on top of that growing demand of data from a change in the environment, online.
And my last question, and coming back to the point of departure, sort of what this PenCP project is about and what this podcast is about is uniting a target audience of the perhaps 1% of customs professionals who really live and breathe customs innovation. My question is, what does Hurricane contribute to this party, to pushing this mission forward? I mean, we've talked about data quality and the improvement of accessibility of data. We talked about dynamic collaboration with a wide range of different market participants. We talked about you're creating forums and you're taking part in existing meetings and forums and networks that push this mission forward. How do you see Hurricane contributing to the mission of PenCP and other aligned projects?
If we see something that we can adapt, change, bring to the table, stimulate change, then if we have that idea this morning, we can implement it this afternoon. So I think we can bring an ability to stimulate those types of conversations. And I think new technology that we develop. We're developing stuff, now that we can launch in 4 weeks' time, which will really enhance some of the activities that customs are doing. now we can do that because we're a private company, right? And if a few of us say this seems like really good direction, and our technical team can get it up and running, within a couple of weeks, then we can launch it. So I think we bring that catalyst factor.
We're not afraid to ask the elephant in the room question. So we're not sort of constrained by what we can think or say as such. And you're asking the question why quite often helps you dive down deeper into the real issue and the best solutions for those issues. I've spent my life in this arena, and it's so compliance is often seen as a cost, as something that's negative for business. For me, I've always seen getting it right at the start as being a huge competitive advantage for those companies that do it right and are happy to do it right and go the extra mile to do it right. Because in the long run, their costs will be lower because there'll be less delays in customs processing, secondary processing, return shipments, as David was mentioning earlier on. And most importantly, their customers are going to be happy and their customer base will grow. And for me, that is really the golden egg behind getting data right. It makes everybody happy.
And it makes the most private and profit-driven company in the world into, in a sense, a public servant. I mean, you're bridging that trust barrier that you talked about earlier by doing it right. You're doing it right for your company and your shareholders and yourselves, but you're also doing it right for customs officials and border authorities and for the public at large. I mean, you're in a sense doing a public service by doing a financial smart thing. Yeah.
And if you talk to people from the private sector, particularly in the transport wing of the private sector, they'll always talk about doing the import and export. Why do we separate the processes of export and transit and import? If you do the job right at the start of that process, and you get the data right, the transit process and the import process can almost be fully automatic activities. Do it right the first time, basically.
And it's a win-win for all parties involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, extremely important observations. David Spottiswood and Martin Palmer of Hurricane Commerce, thank you very, very much for a fascinating conversation.
Thanks, Tom. It's fun.
Thanks, Tom.
It really was. You've been listening to Pushing the Envelope, Life at the Cutting Edge of Customs Innovation, a podcast that profiles leaders in customs and their views, ideas, and inspirations about the future of customs innovation. Customs innovators know this show as the Pencast because it's part of PenCP, a network for boosting customs innovation funded by the European Union under the Horizon 2020 program. Join us for our next Pencast for another insightful conversation with customs trendsetters and forward thinkers. Thank you.